right, good morning, everybody. Sorry for the issues. Looking at the winter outlook for 2021 that's been out for about a month now. I will just quickly go over some winter weather climatology and then look back at last year's winter outlook and how winter went and how the outlook was, and then look at this year's outlook. And we'll cover some, kind of some things that don't really necessarily help with a 3-month long outlook, but looking at specifics of our area and some things that may help you in the shorter term. Look at, things to look at that might help, try to predict events, a couple weeks in advance that won't really be covered by a larger scale outlook. Okay, next. So here's our, looking back at our 30-year normal periods. Here's sort of, what we get snowfall wise based on 30 years of record. You got, a lot of our sites here. Richmond averages 10.3 inches of snow. The standard used right now is the 1981 to 2010 normals. There will be a new set coming out next year that will push it forward to 1991 to 2020. You have the averages shown in the boxes, and then the median values are shown in the oval underneath the boxes. And you can see pretty much everywhere the median values, meaning like 50% of the years will have more, 50% less, are pretty much less than the average values pretty much everywhere in our area. The lines that show the snow amounts from 15, 10, and 5 inches are based on the averages, not the medians. Just to want to show that, you get down to the far southeast part of our area from like Virginia Beach down to northeast North Carolina, you're averaging less than 5 inches of snow a season, and 5 to 10 from a good chunk of our area. Richmond, the southeast eastern sides, right around 10 or a little less, and then you get into downtown Richmond, you're in that 10 to 15 range, and it quickly goes up, and then you get sort of up into the Piedmont there, the northwest Piedmont, you're averaging over 15 inches of snow a season. But now you can do the next one now. I was going to show sort of a historical, looking at Richmond going back over 100 years. We have a long period of record, how much that varies, even over long periods, like decades. You can see the 1960s, for that 10-year stretch, Richmond averaged 24 inches of snow a year at Richmond. And then it's been as low as 7.5 inches in the 1990s, and the 1920s was similarly 8.2 inches. So you can see there's a lot of variability within decade to decade. So there's things at play here that are just, that it's not just pure chance, and it doesn't just stay the same through the period. You can see the graph on the right shows the 30-year period. So there's that 10.3 on the far left of that graph with our current one. And if we go to 1991, 2020, we're probably going to drop that a little bit. It's because we're going to get rid of the relatively snowy 1980s, and we're going to add the last decade, which was snowier than the previous two, but not as snowy as the 1980s. So we're probably going to drop Richmond below 10 inches, and probably somewhere around 9 inches of snow will be the average. Yeah. Next. And okay, next. Okay, here's the median graph, looking at those percentiles, kind of like what Mike was showing earlier with the 90th percentile, 10th percentile for an individual storm. This would be sort of your 10th and 90th percentile for a season. So looking at the 50th being the median, as Richmond was 8.7, even though the average was 10.3. So you can see that when you get up to like the 99th percentile, it's just so much higher than anything else. And basically what that's telling you is that, maybe 1 year out of 30 is just sort of a jackpot, hit the lottery kind of snow year. But you can see that the median is only 8.7. So half of the time we can expect less than 8.7 inches of snow. And then now I'm going to show sort of the last 7 seasons. Mike, I'll just kind of maybe skip a couple seconds with each one. Just next. Like that's, so there's 2013, 14, 15, 16. So those are actually above median. You can see we had 3 years in a row. 2016, 17 had 7.1. 2017, 18 had 12.4. 2018, 19 had 13. So actually we had some relatively snowy years. Then there's last year, 1.5. So we were kind of actually due for that. The feeling was, where was winter last year? It's is true, but we do get those kind of winters. You can see there's actually been one winter in Richmond that didn't even have measurable snow back in 1920, and there are like 10 of them that have had less than an inch of snow. So it's just we don't get that much snow. That's just a fact. Next, and here's Norfolk. As you'd expect, it's even less. You can see Norfolk, the 10th percentile is a trace. So in Norfolk, we've had like 20 years out of since the late 1800s have had less than an inch of snow. In fact, even like 30 years less than an inch of snow, and like 15 years or so, they've had less than maybe a tenth or two. So you see 2013-14 had 15.5 inches. Go next. 2015-14-15 also well above median. Next. 2015-16, 5 inches of snow, 5.4 in 16-17. 17-18 had that big storm before it got real cold right at the beginning of January, so 15 inches. So 18-19 had 0.1, and then last year had 0.4. But see, you can see those, that, it's kind of, you look at the last 7 years, it's kind of averaging out, close to what you'd expect. Next. So we'll look at how did it go last year. We had the snowfall amounts, but here was the outlook that was issued for the December, January, February period for precipitation. This is Richmond. I mean, Norfolk, it's going to show, we'll show the data for Norfolk as well, but you can see the green sort of goes into Virginia, into our area, but it's only a 33% to 40% chance of saying we're going to have above normal rainfall or precipitation for the 3-month period. And then we're close to that equal chances in North Carolina. So really, that's not saying a lot. I mean, even though it's green, it doesn't mean they're saying it was going to be a wet winter. And you look at the totals, and it was above normal precipitation, but only by an inch when you're talking over 10 inches. The normal is over 9 inches. So it wasn't anything crazy winter. And then if you look at November through March, it was actually below normal a little bit based on a sort of a dry November. And as far as the snow, that was well below normal. But as we talked about with the medians, you can see that the normal snow is actually a little bit above what our 50 percentile would be. But yeah, we had 1.5 inches of snow for the whole season, and obviously almost 9 inches less than the 10.3 normal, and still well below our median of 8.7. You can go to the next. And the outlook does not include snow. Also, it just does temperature and precipitation, because you can have a dry winter and have a big snowstorm that still only amounts to 1 to 2 inches of liquid precip equivalent. So they don't do any snow forecasting. So we just show that to show what we had, because that's what a lot of people are obviously interested in. As far as temperature, you can see the outlook was again from that 33 to 40th percentile, so slightly favored that it was going to be a warm winter, but really not a big, no major, declaration that yes, it's going to be a warm winter. And it ended up being a warm winter, as we remember. You can see November was, as we went into winter, going into winter, was cold, but then December and especially January, February, and March were well above normal. And the winter as a whole, December, January, February, was 4 degrees above normal, which is significant when you look at a 3-month period. And even the 5-month period was 3 degrees above normal. So it was warm. Norfolk, kind of similar overall. It did tend to be, sorry, a little pretty normal actually in precip amount for the December, January, February. But we actually had a wet, a little wetter than average when you started to get toward add March in. So we had, I mean, actually it's pretty normal really for precip, and snowfall was almost non-existent in Norfolk. A total of 0.4, just that little bit in February with that one storm on the 21st. But that was it. But as as we said, Norfolk doesn't get a lot of snow, so that's not that unusual. Next. And similarly with temperature, cold November and then really well above normal, especially January through March. So the winter as a whole was well above normal. Next. And next. we're going to focus on sort of this will be part of the things that you can look at that is beyond just the whole 3-month outlook, 5-month outlook kind of thing. Things that you can that sort of help formulate that forecast, but also things, especially the NAO/AO, which is the North Atlantic and the Arctic Oscillation, and the Madden Julian Oscillation MJO, that can sort of help you look ahead for a couple weeks and say, do we have at least a better chance in the next couple weeks of getting a snowstorm or being cold, or are we going to be most likely very warm and have no chance of snow, basically. Next. So El Nino, La Nina, this is pretty much, and next. Yeah, just put them all in there. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so basically the bottom thing there, the bottom line is La Nina will prevail for this winter. There's sort of a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 kind of breakdown with as far as the seasons being El Nino, La Nina, or La Nina. La Nina is basically tends to be a slightly drier and slightly warmer than normal for our area. You probably heard that. And when you look at the outlook, it's going to show that. But I do want to focus on some things that show that it's certainly, as we looked at those probabilities Mike was showing, it's certainly the same way with seasonal forecasting. It's not that, it's definitely not, it's only a slight favoring of these things, not a true thing that, oh yes, it's going to be a warm, dry winter. Next. So just looking at La Nina, it basically means colder than normal temperatures across the tropical Pacific Ocean. And the second one there, the Niño 3.4, you can see on the right there in November, that's where we are now. We're more than a degree Celsius below normal, which for the tropical Pacific is significant. So it's pretty certain that even if this La Nina weakens or whatever, over the next 3 to 4 months, that winter is going to be a La Nina this year. Next. So here, to show the variation, this is the last basically 70 years of data for average temperature and then average snowfall during the 3 different phases, the El Nino, the ENSO neutral, which is neither La Nina, El Nino, and then La Nina on the right in each graph, which is what we're going to be this year. And so when you take the averages, you can see those lines and then the medians across there. You can see, looking at temperature, you can see the temperature is about a little more degree warmer than normal on average with all the La Nina cases compared to the others. But you can see there are some cold ones in there that are colder. So it's not that, it's only a slight skewing of the data. And the same thing with snow. You can see that it's a little less. El Nino is the most for snow for Richmond. But look at the variation from year to year. Even in a La Nina year, you got that one year there with almost 30 inches of snow in Richmond. So it certainly isn't, saying that it's not going to be a snowy winter or not going to be a cold winter. It just, when you look at all the cases, there's just that much variability to say that it is, favored one way or the other. And we'll look at Norfolk next. Now Norfolk, similar overall scale there with the temperatures. It's a little different with snowfall though. And that's something I wanted to bring up, that especially in Southeast Virginia, Northeast North Carolina, that we've seen is that even though when you look at in terms of median snowfall, the Norfolk's slightly lower with median snowfall during La Niñas compared to El Nino and ENSO neutral, you can see that based on average, it's actually, there's almost no difference between the 3 different modes. And you look at that, if you look at, so basically 4 out of the 5 snowiest winters in Norfolk in the last 70 years have actually occurred during La Niñas. So you actually see much more variability during a La Nina compared to an ENSO neutral or an ENSO or an El Nino in Norfolk. So even though the winters tend to be warm and drier than average, when you look at all the data, there's enough variability that there's actually some enhanced chances of some of these big snowstorms that come together at the right time across Southeast Virginia, especially. A good example would be 2010, 2011, right after Christmas there, and all of our area got it as well, but it focused the highest in Norfolk, where Norfolk got 14 inches of snow from Christmas, the night of Christmas into the 26th. And that was a winter where the outlook was warm and dry. So I just wanted to make that point that these outlooks are large scale outlooks for a long period of time, they don't mean you're not going to get a big snowstorm. And as we see with Norfolk in particular, the chances are actually for, you actually have a slightly enhanced chance. It's almost like you have a bet that you're making, and you have a chance of getting a high payoff. It's just not a real good chance. But compared to compared to the snowfall, look at the ENSO neutral. It's much more in line. You've never had an ENSO neutral season in Norfolk in the last 70 years that's had more than 15 inches of snow, even though it's about the same when you look at the median or the average. And the last one would be Salisbury. Next. Salisbury, you kind of see the same as what Norfolk showed a little bit, although not quite to the extent. It's really showing that basically I'm not going to show Louisa or anywhere like that, but as you go northwest of Richmond, those La Nina winters probably tend to be probably the best signal for seeing less snow than average. When you look at Salisbury on the coast to the north, it's kind of between Richmond and Norfolk in terms of how that favors, even though all of them have less snow on average, and except Norfolk for La Ninas. Next. So there's a couple of things that'll help us in the shorter term to sort of help focus, like the next 2 weeks, for instance. It's January, and you want to know the next 2 weeks too. What's the one thing is the North Atlantic Oscillation that can be looked at on Climate Prediction Center's website. So I think, Mike, if you push next, it's just going to show the two modes, highlight them, and then next again. So the positive mode is on. Whoops. Go back. Yeah, no problem. The positive mode on the right is basically when we're warm. You can see on the globe picture there where it says warm to the you can kind of see the United States is off to the left there. You can see it says warm, and then in the negative mode it says cold and snowy over our area. So it's basically just two undulations of the jet stream, and blocking patterns that develop. It might last for a couple weeks at a time and will enhance our chances for snow, or vice versa, make our chances for snow very limited. Next. And next, yeah. The negative NAO is a good predictor for an East Coast trough, and with dip in the jet stream like we showed, which will give us more snow than normal. However, the limitations of it are that it can't be used for seasonal forecasting, like in October for what the whole winter is going to be like, because you really only is predictable a couple weeks in advance. And another limitation that's kind of seen over the past 10 years or so is that it's often not the main or primary mode of climate variability, so that you can have a negative NAO. It usually means it will be cold. However, there are many times when that it's cold, and that doesn't necessarily mean the NAO is negative. So there's many cold outbreaks and snowstorms that occur with a neutral or even a positive NAO. Some of those winters of 5 years ago with those polar vortex winters were actually a positive NAO, even though it was really cold. So while the negative NAO tells you it'll be cold, the cold doesn't tell you that that there'll be a negative NAO. So that's definitely a limitation of the NAO. Next. So something that we started to look at a little bit more in the past 10, 15 years is the Madden Julian oscillation, which is in a way, it's kind of like a 1 to 2 month version of El Nino, La Nina, where it has to do with the tropics on these little phases. You see the map. It's kind of hard to see, but you can see it on each one of those rectangles to the right there. You see where South America is on the right side of the rectangle, and North America is sort of up on North America's up, obviously up to the top of that. And you can see that this is over like a period of 1 to 2 months, where you can see, don't really focus on what the colors are, but just I want to show the propagation that goes from west to east across the tropics over a period of 1 to 2 months. And this is convection in the tropics, not like an individual hurricane or tropical storm, but just sort of enhanced areas of convection, more clouds. And this will affect the jet streams and how it'll affect our weather locally. So you have 8 phases, they call, as it goes across the globe. And typically in the late fall, winter, and early spring have the best chance of having the enhanced activity that really affects our weather. So I'm going to show you how, and it's different month to month, but I'm going to show you what you would see on a climate prediction weather's website on the next page, I think. So this would be like our current conditions, and you can see in phase 2 there where it says Indian Ocean, that means see there down on the bottom, yeah, that's the 15th of November this year. So that's where we are right now, or just 2 days ago. And that's sort of the evolution over the past month, a little over a month of where we've been, like what phase we've been in. And you typically see it go counterclockwise, although it will show some weird undulations. And then once within that circle area in the middle, that means it's pretty insignificant. And as you get further to the outside of the circle, that means you're stronger in that phase. And this is what you'll see on the climate prediction weather site, which is, it's kind of hard to interpret that. So I think try next for a second, Mark. Yeah, okay. So what I've done is I've gone through and looked for our area and see what are we warm or cold during a specific phase. So hit next now over the next slide. Yeah, keep going. So if it's blue, the scale on the right, on the left, sorry. If it's blue, that means we're colder than normal. If it's orange, we're warmer than normal. And the more darker blue, darker orange will tell you how much more above normal we are or below normal and how much more confidence it is. So this is over the past month, but October, the signal's not real strong. So go to the next slide. And I'm going to look back at this will be last year. And I sort of changed it. I put in, I have the phases. So this is what like November would be like. And this is what last year's November was. And it was a pretty cold November, as we showed in the previous data. And so I started where the circle is there on the sort of on the right there. It's like between phase 4 and 5. And we go through and I have it sort of labeled. And you'll see that the distance between each date sort of varies depending on the speed of how the oscillation's going. But the 5th, so early in the month, we were in phase 5, which is supposed to be cold. And then on the right is Salisbury, Richmond, and Norfolk temperatures compared to normal with that shading color. So you can see we were in the cold phase. Then phase 6 is generally average temperatures. So generally we were a little colder than that. And then phase 7 is a little warmer, but we were only in it for a couple of days there. And you see that little warm spell we had on the 11th. That may have been because we were in that phase. And then phase 8 is cold again. And that was the 15th. That was actually probably about 8 days there. And we were cold again. And they can see sort of up and down and probably about average for the rest of the month. Now this isn't really that strong of a signal, but if you go to the next month, and especially we'll see in January and February, and then hit next. Okay, so these are December temperatures. And December, remember, ended up above normal overall. And as you get into winter, you'll start to see that especially phases 4, 5, and 6, if we're in that phase, it's the chances of us getting winter really go down. And you can see so basically from we did have some near normal or maybe even slightly below normal temperatures the first week of December. Then we kind of warmed up around the 10th. And then we had, overall, it wasn't too crazy, but that we really ended up the month warm. As you can see, those departures were a lot of days 10 to 20 degrees above normal. And it doesn't really show a big signal because it went into the circle there as you get into the late part of the month where the arrow is. That's the way it went. So December, it didn't really do that great of a job predicting it, but go to January now, it would be the next slide. And this was a strong signal. I want you to see look at how we started in the circle. So we really didn't have much of an MJO, but by the 5th of the month, we started trending out into phase 4. By the 10th, we were we're way on the outside of the box. That means you have a really strong MJO. And from the 10th through the 15th through the 20th, and look at those temperature departures overall. We had some days in the 70s. Even in Salisbury, we had days in the 70s, 20 to 30 degrees above normal, really across the board. And so that's a pretty good signal there that, it's going to be warm. And then, as you're going counterclockwise around it, you think, okay, well, we're going to eventually get to phase 8, 1, and 2, and then we're going to get cold again. Well, towards the end of the month, what happened was the signal kind of fell apart, and the models did sort of predict this. And so it went back into the middle circle, meaning that there was really no MJO influence. And so that we started to try to get cold there around the 20th, 21st, had a couple of cold days, but it didn't really last, probably because the MJO signal weakened so much we really had trouble getting, you know, we ended up maybe normal for the rest of the month, but not, we didn't get our cold phase. And then the next slide will be February. And you see a bit, little more zigzagging here, but we started in the circle and then we went there down the 5th. We were heading towards phase 5 and 6 again. And you can see correspondingly what we did, you know, well above normal again in the beginning of February. We had around Valentine's Day or the 15th, we started to get a little cold, but then it, you know, warmed back up. And then we had our one snow there on the 20th as we were at least getting out of phase 5, 6, and we were in there heading towards phase 8. And then we just kind of went back in the circle again. So the signal went apart, you know, went away again. So we didn't really get, again, we didn't get into phase 8, 1 or 2 or 3, which would be our colder phases. And next. And by March, you can see the signals weakened. You know, phase 5, 6 aren't necessarily that warm, and that, you know, the different phases change month to month, the climatology of them. You can see, you know, it was a very warm March again. Probably not as much of an influence from the MJO as it was from just other things, but you can see we had a little bit of colder weather there towards the end of the month, in the last 10 days of the month, where you see departures at Richmond. You know, that was from the 20th to the 25th, and you can see we're in phase 2 and 3 at that point. Next. So yeah, basically the point of that MJO was to show that you can sort of monitor this stuff in real time. And you go to the climate prediction website and you will see that, you know, that first one I showed, where you'll see and there'll be a forecast for what the next 2 weeks, what the models think the MJO is going to do. And that can definitely help you in the, you know, in the next 1 to 2 weeks of forecasting, is, you know, used especially in conjunction with things like the NAO. But here's the outlook for this year. And you can see we're a little bit more into that 40th percentile for most of our area, between 40 and 50% saying it's going to be an above normal winter. You can see the chance for the wet versus dry is really less. Southeast Virginia is a little bit drier overall for precipitation, but, you know, that doesn't really tell us anything about snowstorms. And next. And so one thing I would suggest, and hit next. Yeah. I would suggest following these weekly. I'm showing here the 6 to 10 day outlook, but you can see that this is what the outlook is for the next 10 days, 6 to 10 days. And you see it's generally, even though we're cold today, the overall trend for the next, you know, through the end of November basically is for it to be above normal, also above normal on precip there a little bit. But those tend to be, especially when you look at the 6 to 10 day, they tend to be, you'll show higher probabilities of things. It won't just be like the 40th percentile of, you know, that 40% chance above normal. It'll actually be like sometimes really high. And that, you know, give you confidence. You know, lots of times it's because the MJO is in a specific phase, or the NAO is, or other things. And that these, I would suggest following these through the winter, because they, especially the 6 to 10 day and the 8 to 14 day, because they will show some really high probability sometimes where it's like 80%. And, you know, it almost always ends up being correct, that, you know, there's basically no chance that it's going to be the snow for 10 days or whatever. And then there's something new that they've done starting last year, was the week 3 to 4 outlooks that show like a little bit further down the, you know, beyond what it'll be like all the way into December. They're not going to be as accurate, because the further out you get, they'll be less accurate, but they are, you know, they'll at least show a little more detail than what the whole winter outlook shows. But yeah, I mean, basically saying all this, it gets to the point where the winter outlook, don't take it to mean that you're not gonna get a snowstorm this year. Just sort of, as we've shown from the data, especially in the southeast part of our area, that things are just favored, but you can still get a big snowstorm this winter. It's, you know, if the things come together right, it could certainly happen. Next. And yeah, if you have any questions or you want any more specifics on some of the stuff, I had to go through it kind of quick there, but if you want, you know, any specifics, let me know. I always wanted to answer emails, or email me, or call us at the office. Just let us know if you have any questions